The scorching Arizona sun bore down on Zachariah Reed's weathered face as he trotted his faithful buckskin gelding along the dusty trail leading to his ranch. It was the summer of 1878, and Zachariah had just spent 3 days driving a small herd of cattle to the neighboring town of Willow Creek. The 28-year-old cowboy was bone-tired, his muscles aching from the long journey, but he felt a sense of satisfaction knowing he'd fetched a fair price for his stock. As he approached his modest spread nestled in a valley between rugged mountains, something unusual caught his attention. There was movement in his cattle pen, the very pen that should have been empty since he'd sold most of his herd. Narrowing his eyes against the glare of the setting sun, Zachariah reached for the Winchester rifle secured in his saddle holster. Rustlers were common in these parts, and he wasn't about to lose what little he had left. "Easy, Samson," he murmured to his horse as they cautiously approached the pen. The animal's ears pricked forward, sensing his rider's tension. What Zachariah saw when he drew closer made him drop his hand from his weapon in shock. It wasn't rustlers in his pen. It was a woman, a bride by the looks of her somewhat tattered but unmistakably formal white dress. She sat primly on a wooden crate in the middle of the pen, surrounded by the few remaining cattle who seemed utterly uninterested in their unusual companion. Zachariah dismounted and approached the fence, removing his hat out of instinct. "Madam, are you all right?" The woman looked up, and Zachariah found himself staring into the most striking blue eyes he'd ever seen. Despite her disheveled appearance, wisps of auburn hair escaping from what had once been an elegant updo, smudges of dirt on her pale cheeks, there was a dignity about her that commanded respect. "They forgot me," she said simply, her voice cracking slightly from what he presumed was thirst. Zachariah blinked, certain he had misheard. "I beg your pardon, the wagon train," she clarified, gesturing vaguely westward. "My intended husband's family, they forgot me during our midday stop." A bitter smile crossed her lips. Or perhaps they didn't forget at all. Something in Zachariah's chest tightened at the implications of her words. He unlatched the gate and stepped into the pen, approaching her slowly as one might a spooked horse. "I never will," he said, the words falling from his lips before he could think better of them. "Forget you, that is." He extended his hand. "Zachariah Reed, this is my ranch you found yourself in, miss." "Abigail," she replied, placing her gloved hand in his. "Abigail Montgomery." "Or I would have been Abigail Blackwood by now, had things gone according to plan." "Well, Miss Montgomery," Zachariah said, helping her to her feet, "I believe we need to get you out of this cattle pen into some fresh clothes and find you something to eat and drink. Then we can figure out what to do about your situation." As he led her out of the pen, Zachariah couldn't help but wonder what kind of people would abandon a woman to the dangers of the frontier. The thought made his blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral for Abigail's sake. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Reed," Abigail said, her voice stronger now that she had a direction, a plan, however temporary. "Zach," he corrected with a gentle smile. "Everyone calls me Zach. Then I shall call you Zachariah," she replied with unexpected firmness. "It's a dignified name, and you've shown me dignity when others have not." Something about the way she said his full name, something no one had done since his mother passed, warmed him from the inside out. "As you wish, Miss Montgomery." "Abigail," she insisted, a flicker of something that might have been humor passing through her eyes. "After all, if you're never going to forget me, we might as well be properly introduced." Zachariah couldn't help the chuckle that escaped him. It seemed Miss Abigail Montgomery had spirit beneath her proper exterior spirit that even being abandoned in a cattle pen couldn't diminish. And that, he decided as he helped her mount Samson before climbing up behind her, was something truly worth remembering. The ride to Zachariah's modest cabin took less than 10 minutes. He kept a respectful distance between them as they rode, though the circumstances made it impossible to avoid all contact. He was acutely aware of Abigail's rigid posture, the way she held herself with a kind of forced propriety despite her predicament. "It's not much," Zachariah warned as they approached the small but sturdy log structure. "Built it with my own hands 3 years ago. Been adding to it bit by bit when I can spare the time." Abigail surveyed the cabin and the surrounding land with curious eyes. "You live here alone?" "Just me and Samson," he confirmed, helping her dismount. "And the cattle, of course. My nearest neighbor is Tom Fletcher, about 5 miles east." Inside, the cabin was simple but tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a small table with 2 chairs sat beneath a window, and a narrow bed was tucked into one corner. A few shelves held books, more than might be expected for a solitary rancher, and practical cooking implements hung from hooks by the fireplace. "Please, sit," Zachariah gestured to one of the chairs. "I'll get you some water and see what I can find for supper." Abigail lowered herself gracefully into the chair, arranging her soiled skirts as best she could. "May I ask what day it is?" "Tuesday, July 23rd, Zachariah replied, filling a cup with water from a pitcher. "I've been gone 2 days, she murmured, accepting the cup with trembling hands. "They've been traveling without me for 2 days. Zachariah hesitated, then sat in the chair opposite her. "Miss Montgomery, Abigail, I hope you don't mind my asking, but how exactly did you end up in my cattle pen?" She took a long drink of water before answering. "We stopped for the midday meal near a creek. I walked a short distance for privacy, and when I returned, they were gone." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Zachariah could sense the hurt beneath her composed exterior. "All of them, your intended and his family." "The entire wagon train, 15 wagons. I called out, but no one heard me." She set the cup down carefully. "I followed their trail as best I could, but I'm not skilled in tracking. When night fell, I took shelter in an abandoned structure I found. The next day, I continued walking but eventually lost the trail. By pure chance, I stumbled upon your ranch yesterday evening. The cattle pen seemed safer than sleeping in the open, so I climbed inside." Zachariah struggled to hide his outrage. "And this man you were to marry, he didn't notice you were missing." Something flashed in Abigail's eyes, pain, perhaps, or resignation. "Walter and I have had a complicated courtship. It was primarily arranged by his parents and my father." She looked down at her hands. "I suspect Walter may have informed his parents that I had changed my mind about the marriage." "That's unconscionable," Zachariah said, unable to keep the anger from his voice. "To leave a woman alone in this territory, life is full of disappointments, Mr. Reed," Abigail interrupted gently. "I've learned to adapt," Zachariah nodded, respecting her resilience even as he silently cursed the man who had abandoned her. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until we figure out your next steps. I'll sleep in the barn. It's comfortable enough with the fresh hay." "I couldn't possibly displace you from your home," Abigail protested. "It's no trouble," he insisted. "Now, let me see about finding you something more comfortable to wear while I prepare something to eat." He rummaged through a trunk and produced a clean shirt and a pair of trousers that had shrunk in washing. "These will be too large, but they're clean. There's a privacy screen in that corner you can change behind. I'll step outside while you do." When Zachariah returned with eggs from the chicken coop, Abigail had transformed. His clothes hung on her slender frame, but she had rolled the sleeves and tied a piece of rope around the waist of the trousers. She had washed her face and hands in the basin and had managed to tame her auburn hair into a simple braid. Without the formal wedding attire, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but somehow even more dignified. "I hung my dress to air out," she explained, nodding toward the privacy screen where the white garment was draped. "Thank you for the clothes." Zachariah nodded, suddenly finding himself at a loss for words. He busied himself with preparing a simple meal of eggs, beans, and biscuits left over from his last baking. As they ate, he learned more about Abigail, that she was 23, had grown up in St. Louis, and had been traveling west because her intended, Walter Blackwood, had inherited land in California. "My father died last winter," she explained. "There was little left after his debts were paid. The Blackwoods were family friends and the arrangement seemed practical." "Not much of a basis for marriage," Zachariah observed, then immediately regretted his bluntness. But Abigail didn't seem offended. "No," she agreed, "but practicality has its place in the world, especially for a woman alone." After supper, despite Abigail's protests, Zachariah gathered blankets and headed to the barn. "Rest well," he told her. Tomorrow we can ride into town and speak with Sheriff Davis. He might have some suggestions about contacting the wagon train or finding you safe passage to wherever you'd like to go next." Abigail nodded, though something like uncertainty flickered across her features. "Thank you, Zachariah, for everything." As he settled into the makeshift bed in his barn, Zachariah found himself thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought Abigail Montgomery to his cattle pen. He had been alone so long that having another person in his space in his clothes, at his table, felt peculiar. But not unpleasant, he realized. Not unpleasant at all. Dawn broke clear and bright the next morning. Zachariah rose early, as was his habit, and tended to the animals before approaching the cabin. He knocked softly, not wanting to wake Abigail if she was still sleeping. "Come in," her voice called. "I'm decent." He found her at the stove, stirring a pot of coffee. She had folded the blankets neatly on the bed and swept the floor. "You didn't have to do that," he said, gesturing to the clean cabin. "I wanted to earn my keep," she replied. "I'm afraid I don't know how to cook much beyond coffee and basic porridge. My education focused more on needlework and literature than practical skills." "The coffee is more than enough," Zachariah assured her, accepting a steaming cup. "We can have breakfast in town if you're hungry." Widow Parker runs a decent eating establishment. Abigail had washed her wedding dress as best she could, and though it was wrinkled and still bore faint stains, she had donned it again. "I can't go into town dressed in your clothes," she explained, noticing his questioning look. "It would cause talk, and you've been kind enough without adding scandal to your burdens." The town of Juniper Springs was small but growing, situated about an hour's ride from Zachariah's ranch. As they approached on Samson, Abigail riding behind Zachariah, he could feel her tension mounting. "The sheriff is a good man," he assured her, "and the town is generally welcoming to newcomers." Still, he understood her apprehension. A lone woman in the frontier was vulnerable in more ways than one. As they rode down the main street, Zachariah was acutely aware of the curious glances cast their way. At the sheriff's office, they found Davis at his desk, reviewing wanted posters. He looked up, surprise evident on his weathered face at the sight of Zachariah with a woman in a wedding dress. "Zach Reed," he greeted, rising to his feet. "This is unexpected." Zachariah made the introductions and explained Abigail's situation. Sheriff Davis listened attentively, his expression growing grave. "The Blackwood wagon train passed through here about a week ago," he confirmed. "Heading to California, like you said, but I haven't heard anything about them turning back or losing a passenger." "So they didn't report me missing," Abigail said quietly. The sheriff had the decency to look uncomfortable. "No, madam, they didn't." "But that doesn't necessarily mean—" "It means exactly what I suspected," Abigail interrupted, her voice steady despite the hurt evident in her eyes. "Walter took the opportunity to end our engagement without confrontation." Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "Well, Miss Montgomery, we need to consider your options. There's another wagon train expected through in about 3 weeks. I could arrange passage for you if California is still your destination. Or St. Louis," Zachariah suggested, "if you wanted to return home." Abigail was silent for a long moment, considering. "I have no home in St. Louis anymore," she finally said, "and I have no reason to continue to California." She straightened her shoulders. "What I need is employment and a place to stay until I can establish myself." "Widow Parker might have a room to let above the restaurant," Sheriff Davis offered, "and she's always complaining about needing help with the cooking and serving." "That would be suitable," Abigail nodded. "I may not be an accomplished cook, but I can learn, and I'm not afraid of hard work." After leaving the sheriff's office, they made their way to Widow Parker's establishment. The plump, cheerful woman listened to their story with sympathetic clucks and immediately offered Abigail a position and the small room above the restaurant. "It's not much," she warned, leading Abigail upstairs to see the space, "but it's clean and private." Left alone downstairs, Zachariah ordered coffee and tried to sort through his conflicting emotions. He was relieved that Abigail had found a safe place to stay and work that would allow her some independence. But the thought of returning to his empty cabin left him with an unexpected hollowness in his chest. When the women returned, Widow Parker bustling off to the kitchen, Abigail sat across from Zachariah with a tentative smile. "Mrs. Parker says I can start tomorrow," she told him. "She's even offered to help me alter some of her late daughter's dresses to fit me." "That's fortunate," Zachariah replied, genuinely pleased for her even as he felt a strange reluctance to say goodbye. "Mrs. Parker is well respected in town. Her endorsement will help establish you here." "I'm grateful for your help, Zachariah," Abigail said, her blue eyes earnest. "I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't found me in that cattle pen." "Anyone would have done the same," he demurred. "No," she said firmly, "not anyone. You showed me kindness when I was at my most vulnerable. I won't forget that." After a simple meal, paid for by Zachariah despite Abigail's protests, they stood awkwardly outside the restaurant. "I should be getting back to the ranch," Zachariah said, his hat in his hands. "Plenty of chores waiting." "Of course," Abigail nodded. "Thank you again for everything." "I'll check on you when I'm next in town," he promised. "Probably in a week or so when I need supplies." "I would like that," she replied with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since he'd met her. As he rode home alone, Zachariah found himself replaying their brief time together in his mind. There was something about Abigail Montgomery that intrigued him, her quiet strength, her dignity in the face of abandonment, the flashes of wit and warmth beneath her proper exterior. He had lived alone for so long, content with his books and his animals for company, that the sudden emptiness of his cabin took him by surprise. "Just not used to having someone around," he told Samson as he unsaddled the horse. "We'll adjust back to our bachelor ways soon enough." But as the days passed, Zachariah found himself inventing reasons to ride into town. He needed nails for a loose board on the barn. He should check if there were any letters for him at the post office. The general store might have that book he'd been wanting to read. Each time, he would stop at Widow Parker's restaurant, where Abigail was gradually establishing herself. She learned quickly, and though her cooking had started out basic, she was developing a reputation for her delicate pastries and elegant presentation, touches of refinement that Juniper Springs hadn't seen before. "The men are coming in just for her apple tarts," Widow Parker confided to Zachariah during one visit about 3 weeks after Abigail had started working. "She's been a godsend, never complains, works from dawn till dusk." Zachariah had noticed the admiring glances Abigail received from some of the town's eligible bachelors. It shouldn't have bothered him. She was free to court whom she pleased, but he found himself irrationally annoyed whenever he saw her smiling at another man. "Heard Johnson, the banker, invited her to the town social next weekend," Tom Fletcher commented casually when they met on the trail one day. "Reckon she might be the next Mrs. Johnson before winter. She's only been here a month," Zachariah replied more sharply than he intended. "Hardly time to be thinking of marriage after what she's been through." Tom gave him a knowing look that Zachariah pretended not to notice. The night of the social, Zachariah told himself he wouldn't go. He had attended exactly one town gathering in the 3 years he'd lived near Juniper Springs, and that had been enough. But as evening approached, he found himself washing with particular care, trimming his beard and donning his one good shirt. "This is foolishness," he muttered to his reflection in the small mirror. But he saddled Samson anyway and rode into town. The social was being held in the newly built schoolhouse, a project the whole community had contributed to. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the gathered townsfolk. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Zachariah stood awkwardly near the entrance, scanning the crowd for a familiar head of auburn hair. He spotted her finally, standing near the refreshment table in a dress of deep green that complemented her coloring perfectly. She was laughing at something said by Edgar Johnson, the banker, a widower in his 40s with a reputation for fair business dealings, and a substantial house on the edge of town. Something twisted in Zachariah's chest at the sight. Johnson could offer Abigail security, respectability, a comfortable life. All things Zachariah's modest ranch could not provide. He was about to turn and leave when Abigail looked up and saw him. Her face brightened, and she excused herself from Johnson's company to make her way toward Zachariah. "You came," she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "I didn't think you would." "Neither did I," he admitted with a rueful smile, "not much for gatherings." "Then I'm especially honored," she replied. "Would you like some punch? Mrs. Parker made it, so it's quite good." As they stood sipping punch and observing the dancers, Zachariah found himself more relaxed than he had expected to be. Abigail had a way of making conversation easy, drawing him out without pressure. "How is life at the restaurant?" he asked. "Widow Parker says you're becoming quite the attraction with your baking." Abigail blushed slightly. "I've been experimenting with recipes I remember from my mother. She was an excellent baker." She hesitated, then added, "I've been saving my wages. I hope to rent a small place of my own eventually." "Johnson seems taken with you," Zachariah said, immediately regretting bringing up the banker. "Mr. Johnson has been very kind," Abigail acknowledged, her expression neutral, "as have many people in town." "He's a good man," Zachariah forced himself to say. "Stable, respected." Abigail gave him a curious look. "Yes, he is. Are you recommending him to me, Zachariah?" There was something in her tone, a gentle teasing, perhaps, that made him meet her gaze directly. "No," he said honestly, "I'm not." Before she could respond, the band struck up a waltz and couples began to move onto the floor. "Would you dance with me, Abigail?" The question surprised them both. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "I would be delighted." Zachariah wasn't an experienced dancer, but he knew the basic steps. As he guided Abigail around the floor, he was acutely aware of her hand in his, the light pressure of his other hand at her waist, the subtle scent of lavender that seemed to surround her. "You dance very well for a man who avoids social gatherings," she observed. "My mother insisted I learn," he explained. "Said every gentleman should know how to waltz, even if he lives on the frontier." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he agreed, a touch of sadness in his voice. "She died when I was 16. My father followed 3 years later." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "Is that when you came west?" Zachariah nodded. "There was nothing left for me in Pennsylvania. I worked on cattle drives for a few years, saved every penny, then bought my land outright." "You've built something to be proud of," Abigail said, her admiration evident. "It's modest compared to what some men have achieved," he replied. "But it's yours," she pointed out. "Built with your own hands, through your own efforts. There's honor in that, Zachariah." The way she said it, as if his small ranch were as impressive as the grandest estate, touched something deep inside him. The music ended too soon, and Zachariah reluctantly released her. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally. "The pleasure was mine," she replied with equal formality, though the warmth in her eyes belied her proper tone. They were interrupted by Edgar Johnson, who approached with a proprietary air that set Zachariah's teeth on edge. "Miss Montgomery," Johnson said with a bow. "I believe you promised me the next dance." "So I did, Mr. Johnson," Abigail acknowledged. She turned to Zachariah. "Will you excuse me?" "Of course," he replied, stepping back. "I should be heading home soon anyway." But he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he watched as Johnson led Abigail in another waltz, his technique more polished than Zachariah's, but somehow lacking the connection they had shared. Or perhaps that was merely his wishful thinking. As the evening progressed, Zachariah found himself engaged in conversations with neighbors he rarely spoke to, even accepting a second dance with Widow Parker herself. But his eyes kept returning to Abigail, noting how she smiled and laughed, how gracefully she moved, how everyone seemed drawn to her natural charm. When he finally decided it was time to leave, he sought her out to say goodbye. He found her outside, standing alone on the small porch of the schoolhouse, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Needed some air?" he asked, joining her. "Yes," she admitted. "It's a lovely party, but a bit overwhelming after hours in the kitchen." "I'm heading back to the ranch," he told her. "Just wanted to say goodnight." Abigail turned to face him, her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "Would you walk with me first? Just a short way. I could use the fresh air and quiet conversation." They strolled down the main street, now nearly deserted as most of the town was at the social. The night was cool but pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Mr. Johnson asked permission to court me formally, Abigail said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Zachariah's heart sank, but he kept his voice steady. That's quick. But not surprising. You're an exceptional woman, Abigail. I told him I needed time to consider, she continued. He's a fine man, as you said. He could offer me security, a good position in the community. You deserve those things, Zachariah said, meaning it despite the ache in his chest. But is that enough? Abigail stopped walking, turning to face him directly. After what happened with Walter and his family, I've been thinking a great deal about what I truly want from life. Security is important, yes, but so is. She hesitated, searching for the right word, connection. Understanding, the feeling that someone sees you, truly sees you, and values what they see. Zachariah held his breath, afraid to hope but unable to stop himself. And Johnson doesn't make you feel that way. No, she said simply. He doesn't. The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Zachariah took a step closer, his heart pounding. Abigail, he began, then faltered, searching for the right words. I'm not a wealthy man. My ranch is small, the work is hard, and I can't offer you the kind of life Johnson could. I'm not asking about what you can offer in material terms, she replied softly. Then what are you asking? When you found me in that cattle pen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and I told you they forgot me, you said you never would. Did you mean it? Yes, Zachariah answered without hesitation. I meant it then, and I mean it now. I could never forget you, Abigail. These past weeks, every day you weren't at the ranch, it felt empty, incomplete. He took a deep breath. I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you sitting there among my cattle, somehow maintaining your dignity despite everything. Abigail's eyes glistened in the moonlight. I've felt the same, she admitted. At first I thought it was just gratitude, but it's more than that. When I'm with you, I feel safe, but not because you're protecting me. I feel safe because you see me as I am, not as an obligation or a possession, but as a person of value. Zachariah reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and cupped her cheek in his hand. You are of immeasurable value, Abigail Montgomery. To me, and to this community, you've already begun to transform with your presence. I don't need a grand house or social position, she said, leaning slightly into his touch. But I do need honesty, respect, and partnership. Can you offer those, Zachariah Reed? With all my heart, he promised. Then that is enough, she whispered, and rose up on her toes to press her lips gently against his. The kiss was brief but held the promise of a lifetime. When they parted, Zachariah kept hold of her hands, unwilling to break the connection between them. This won't be easy, he warned. Ranch life is demanding, especially for someone not raised to it. I'm stronger than I look, Abigail replied with a smile, and a quick learner, but perhaps we should take some time court properly, as Mr. Johnson suggested, before making any permanent decisions. Zechariah nodded, though part of him wanted to ride straight to the preacher's house that very night. You're right, we have time. As they walked back toward the schoolhouse, hand in hand now, Zachariah felt a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments for both of them, but for the first time since he'd claimed his land, he was building something more meaningful than fences and barns. He was building a future with someone who chose him, not out of necessity or practicality, but out of genuine affection and respect. In the months that followed, Juniper Springs witnessed a courtship unlike any the town had seen. Zachariah rode in regularly, sometimes bringing wildflowers he'd gathered along the trail, other times arriving with a book he thought Abigail might enjoy. She, in turn, saved special treats for him from the restaurant kitchen and began riding out to the ranch on her days off, learning about cattle and chickens and the rhythm of ranch life. They were married the following spring, with Widow Parker crying happy tears in the front pew of the small church and Sheriff Davis standing as Zachariah's best man. Edgar Johnson, to his credit, gave them a generous wedding gift of linens for their home and remained a friend to them both. The wedding night found them standing on the porch of the cabin, now expanded with a proper kitchen and a second bedroom for the future, as Zachariah had shyly explained during construction. "What are you thinking?" Zachariah asked, his arm around his wife's waist as they gazed at the stars. "I'm thinking about how strange life can be," Abigail replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "If that wagon train hadn't left me behind, if I hadn't found your ranch, if you hadn't come home that day, if you hadn't been sitting in my cattle pen," he added with a chuckle. "Exactly." She turned in his arms to face him. "So many coincidences had to align for us to find each other." "I don't believe it was coincidence," Zachariah said seriously. "I think somehow we were meant to find each other. All those years I spent alone, building this place, I was preparing it for you, without even knowing it. And all those social graces my father insisted I learn, they weren't for Walter Blackwood after all. They were to help me build a new community here with you." Zachariah bent to kiss her, no longer hesitant but with the confidence of a man who knows he is loved. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed." "I've been home since the moment you found me," Abigail whispered against his lips. "You promised you'd never forget me, and in doing so, you helped me find myself." As they stepped into their cabin together, closing the door on the world outside, both knew that what had begun in a cattle pen with words of abandonment and promise had transformed into something neither could have imagined: a love built on choice rather than circumstance, on seeing and being seen, on the daily decision to remember and cherish what they had found in each other. And in the years that followed, through the births of their children, through droughts and abundant harvests, through all the joys and sorrows that make up a life shared, neither Zachariah nor Abigail ever forgot the strange beginning of their love story, or the promise that had started it all.